everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you to the organizers for making this possible. Thank you for the introduction. Just by way of adding a little bit more of context, my PhD was really looking at human behavior, physical environment relationships, so really the interaction effects between people and place. And so that's also a way of thinking about geography. When thinking about this talk and what I could offer from my perspective as a practicing planner, an activist planner in an institution like Hunter, I started to think about that I could probably help situate open data, open knowledge, open GIS in the context of thinking about spatial citizenship. It's a term that has been used in the literature. It's not particularly new, but probably trying to build traction for that terminology here and see if we can establish some connections between open GIS and spatial citizenship, and really took to heart the panelists' charge, which was how do we achieve this truly open GIS? Or then I started thinking about, is it open GIS or is it to be open with GIS? So it's the classic tool science conundrum that we keep talking about in the GIS world. So as I'm an educator, I work with, I prepare practicing planners. I'm a researcher. I work with communities that are often marginalized for one reason or the other. And so from that perspective, looking at the lens, with that lens, looking at this landscape of what comes under the umbrella of open GIS or open planning, the landscape is very crowded. It seems almost daunting for an outsider to look at this landscape. So you have industry, you have the scientific community, you certainly have the activist community, everybody is sort of putting their mark on what it means to be open and do research in this way. And this is a screen grab from CityFixer, and open is everywhere. So I'm a practicing planner. I'm preparing experts who are quote unquote experts in planning, but these days everybody's a planner. So there's a little tension here about what happens when we use OpenGIS, because it empowers a whole bunch of people to have positions and interventions about the city that we live in. So you all are probably familiar with these concepts and terminologies, but it's just to think about, you can't get anywhere in this day and age without hearing big data thrown in. It almost is sort of de rigueur to have the phrase big data, and there's been occasional critiques of what big data is and the limits of big data for the kinds of problems that we're trying to solve, but essentially we are really moving into a highly data-driven geography work that has pros and cons. I assume that we'll address them in the discussion, but in the end it comes back to what you said, like, technology for the common good, it's sort of these cliches, don't do evil or use technology for good. And you immediately have to ask, good for whom? Good for what? And without that, it's really not very helpful. But yet, that's what we hear in everywhere. So I said to you that I was looking at people-place relationships. So most of my thinking is really about this: how do we, as human beings and gatherings of human beings, with the help of technologies, transform the world we live in? And we all have examples by which we do this on a day-to-day basis. But it seems to me this week in particular, considering all the events that have occurred, we probably want to think about sort of those pesky issues that have been there from the beginning, right? Access to information. Who has access, who doesn't have access, and how quickly that access can be taken away. Because and it's the same argument about privacy. There's a conversation worldwide going on right now about what our right to privacy is, really, and particularly geospatial, in geospatial privacy. And then the ethics of using this approach, the data-driven approach to decision-making, and sort of in the public interest, but really who defines what that public interest is. And so I put it to you very bluntly. I ask you who has the power. And so I make this list, which I try to make it in terms of a hierarchy, so going from most power to least power. And some of you might look at this and say, hey, you got the order all wrong, because really, you put universities in there above super PACs. Can that be? And we can quibble about where each one is on this hierarchy, but there's some people who are they didn't even make it to the list, right? And so the people who don't have formal education, who don't have skills, aren't even on this list. So then, and when I say power, I don't just mean money power. Money power is really important, but there's infrastructure power, there's computing power, there's data power, there's staffing, like, technical support power. And in that context, we are not really engaging very carefully about the large swath of people who are not on this list as a community of scholars and educators and activists. So when I move on to think about, how we are creating knowledge, how we are producing knowledge, and how we are using knowledge, at least in my field, which is planning, we have moved from doing planning, which is a very normative, future-oriented set of goals, to being managers. And nothing wrong with being managers. You need good managers. But management of cities is very different from planning of cities. And there's a tension there, which we are glossing over right now. Because if you talk to the big data folks, and if you talk to the people who are using let's come to open in a minute, but if you're talking about big data and how it's used to serve cities, it's all about just-in-time, real-time decision-making, solving problems on the fly. And I occasionally introduce questions about causality, and I get shot down right away. And the answer usually is, you don't need to worry about causality or causal chains. Correlation's good enough to get the job done. And for management purposes, yes, that in some sense that the correlation is all that we may need. But it seems to me that we are missing out some huge opportunities in not asking these difficult questions as a bigger community. I think the conversations are happening, but they are very siloed. So I did my own Yelp version of what I think is going on. Totally, this is Laxmi's view of the world. And you're welcome to argue with me about it. So I think that why do we care about open data? Why do we care about open GIS, open knowledge? Because we want to address those larger societal goals of democratizing decision-making. I presume we're not doing it just for the sake of doing it. We see there's a causal link there. So how are we doing? And I think we're doing pretty well on data access, although we can quibble about this because you go back to data that used to be open is no longer open. Data that used to be free is no longer free. It keeps changing. I can't rely on things always being accessible. And it happened post 9/11. I have no idea what's going to happen now, but essentially there's a change that happens as geopolitics changes. Information access, data is data. Synthesized information is accessible if you know how to make sense of the information that's being presented to you. I think there's great opportunities for dialogue. We come together, there's different forums, and I think we're doing very well on individual empowerment, right? And that is the commercial angle to all of this, that you as an individual are very empowered because you have access to all of this information and data that you can then use in your own way. And perhaps, my co-panelists will talk some about that. I think we're not doing very well on group empowerment. That we're not really doing well on using the open data, the open knowledge, to actually deal with structural problems, sociopolitical problems. We're not doing well we are reactive. We are not, so again, it's just a tension between planning and management. We are reactive rather than being proactive. So let me pivot a little bit. The next set of ideas is really related to citizenship. And so if you do a simple word cloud, you come up with these terms that relate to critical thinking and reasoning. Because in order to be a spatial citizen, you have to have motivation to use these technologies to participate, to actually, again, to bring this idea of participating in democratic processes. So I started to think about what are the components, what are the framework elements that would allow you to participate. So then if you look at these individual frames like methodological competency, technical competency, communication competency, or situational assessment competency, then you start to think, what should we be doing? I'm in the education sector. What should I be doing as an educator to prepare my students to achieve these competencies? And what is the open GIS community doing to help me address these goals? And I think they are doing a great deal, but really that's a continuing question. I'll move over this. I think there are benefits that are quite clear that I argue, I think others argue, that if you're a spatial citizen, you're more engaged and you are able to solve problems in a collaborative way. But that it also allows for those folks who are building tools and processes to customize and deliver supportive infrastructure that is respectful of local knowledge. So I will tell you that if, in terms of where we want to be, I think that you need open GIS, open data, open knowledge, as well as preparing spatial citizens, which are sort of two different things, in order to achieve the promise that OpenGIS is offering. So that's kind of my take-home message, really, that I'm glad that the OpenGIS community is coming together and doing all these things, but that by itself is not going to achieve our long-term goal. So maybe I can come later for talking about, I have discussion implications for research, for education, and for practice, but perhaps I will save that for the discussion part of the talk. Thank you.